Hey, everybody, it's Becky Drost. Thank you for joining me on Gorilla HR, the podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, and that is workplace culture. So, everybody likes to talk about how culture is so important. And when you're attracting and retaining people, the culture that you create is really just critical. And people don't leave because of money, is what they like to say. They like to say it's about the culture. And it drives me crazy when I hear that. But the thing that really drives me crazy when people talk about culture is they love to say, we're a family. Our workplace is a family and we take care of each other. Well, I say, fuck that. Your workplace is not your fucking family. And we need to stop perpetuating that idea when it's simply not the truth. Now, that doesn't mean that you cannot be a family friendly employer. Absolutely. And you should be. I would love that. And we'll talk about some things you could do to support that today. But it drives me crazy when people say that because when we think about the things that we provide to employees as employers, it's not the things that you would provide to your family. So let's stop saying that and let's talk about what we can do to show that we do support families if that is in fact what we're after. So, when we're talking about this whole idea of culture today, I want to start with just some definitions around culture. So, ultimately, when we're describing an organization's culture, what we're talking about is their brand. It's really their identity. What are the values and the beliefs that they operate under? What are kind of the business norms and the customs that happen in the workplace, or if you're remote, the things that happen outside of a place, but in the way that you perform your work? So it's really that holistic view. What are you all about as an employer? And what is that work experience like for your people? I think it was probably a meme or something stupid that I saw on social media, but I saw something that said for your employees, the way that they would think of culture is how they feel at the end of their weekend or at the end of that couple days off that they have and they're getting ready to go back to work. What's their thought about going back to work? Are they like, "Ooh, yay, I can't wait to go back and see certain people," or are they like, "Oh my god, I don't want to go back. I wish this vacation would never end." And so I like that comparison just in the sense that it's kind of like, how do people feel when you have to go back to work? You know, is it good? Is it bad? Overall, all the things that are going into creating that feeling for your employee are really coming out as a result of what you've done around culture. So, when you think about your workplace culture, whether you are there trying to shape that culture or you are there as an employee, not necessarily responsible for driving culture, I want you to think about what does that culture look like? How did your organization get there? Are you doing intentional things to create the culture that you think that you want to have? Everybody has a culture. So whether you're intentional about it, that is a different question. Everybody's got one. And it's really what do you do to make sure that you're creating that work environment and that culture that you really want to have in order to attract and retain your people? So when we think about that culture and how we're going to create it, we can't necessarily start with the end in mind. We can't be thinking, "Ooh, let's get ping pong tables and let's buy pizzas for everybody on Friday and let's do all these different things." We can't jump right into the actions without starting by evaluating your strategy. So, as an organization, you all have some kind of business strategy. Are you all about efficiency? Are you delivering goods quickly? Are you turning around a product super quickly? Are you creating unique products? Do you have something where there's a lot of creativity or there's a lot of technical skills and a lot of knowledge that takes a lot of time to develop and go into a product? Are you all about customer service? Is your whole model around the experience that your customers have when they're interacting with you? This is where we have to start when we think about the culture that we're creating for our employees, because we can't jump to that end without thinking about that strategy first. Of course, a lot of different things go into this. Certainly when we're thinking about the labor market, what's going on? Is it a situation where we have low unemployment as we do right now? Do we have a lack of workers for a lot of jobs as we do right now? Some of these things drive experiences where it's really, I would say, up to the job seeker or to the employees. They have a little bit more of the control because the employers need the people with those particular skills. And that ebbs and flows. We see different shifts in time, but certainly that's going to shape what we do as far as culture. Of course, looking at global competition, right now, I got to say, looking at changes in the laws and regulation is definitely going to drive culture. So, right now, we're in the beginning of 2025. And over the last several weeks, we've had a lot of changes when it comes to laws and regulations governing the employment relationships. And so, that's something where it's certainly going to have an impact on how your people are feeling about work. And then, of course, thinking about where you are as a company. Are you relatively new and you're just getting started where you don't necessarily have all of those norms established yet? Or are you a company that's been around for a really long time? And so you have a lot of those common practices and accepted practices really set in place. So, all of these things are going to go into creating our culture and who we want to be as an employer. So, again, we got to start at the beginning thinking about who we are. What are we really here to do as an organization, and then build a system where we're going to support that culture that we want. With our culture, essentially what we're doing is we're taking that value proposition. So that's, what does an employee get in exchange for working for you? And we want to turn that into something where we're reinforcing the behaviors that we want. So essentially, what I'm saying is, if there's something you want your employees to do, some way you want them to act, you've got to make sure that you're giving them what they need in order to incent them to do that. So if you have people and they just get paid to show up and be a warm body and you don't do anything about it, that's what you're incenting. They're like, okay, that's fine. I just show up and I don't have to do anything and I get paid. Versus creating culture where maybe you're like, no, you have KPIs, you have certain deliverables or certain expectations. And the way that you reward those, that's going to drive that culture. So it's all pretty common sense stuff until we dig in a little bit deeper to some of the different parts that go into creating this value proposition. So when we're talking about that value proposition, what do you give to an employee in exchange for their work? There are a couple different things we can look at. This is all going to fall under the bucket of what I call total reward. So we're going to talk about comp, we're going to talk about benefits, work-life effectiveness, performance management, and talent development. All of these pieces you can pick and choose and create. What does it take to create the culture you want and reinforce from your people? Let's start by talking about pay. So when we talk about pay as an organization, I constantly hear from people that they want to be competitive with the market. And so I ask them like, well, great. How do you know what the market is doing? And I have a lot of employers that are like, I don't know. I just rely on what somebody asks for, or I look at what I'm paying people I already have. And then if I go to make an offer, well, I certainly don't want to pay somebody else more than what my current people are making. And so that's what they're using to say we're competitive. Well, that's not good enough. So if you have a culture that says we are competitive with pay, you've got to know what's actually happening with the market. So there are a variety of ways to do that. Certainly, you can work with somebody like me or another consultant out there who will help guide you through that process, but you can also go out and look at data on your own. So you've got to start by figuring out, if we want to be competitive, who are we competing against? Are we hiring people that are just in a certain geographic location? Are we hiring people that are all across the country? Where are we getting our people from, and where are we losing them to? Those are the questions that I think you need to start with when you're trying to figure out, are we actually competitive with pay? Now, you might decide that you're a newer company. Maybe you don't have the funds, and so you can't pay as much. That's okay as long as you're intentional about it. On the flip side, you might say, you know what, I have some really niche skills and I can't afford to be hiring and losing people, bringing them in and out, and I can't get them trained fast enough, all that good stuff. And so you say, I'm going to pay a little more. I want to lead the market. So you have to be really intentional in your philosophy so that it matches what you say you want to do. So if you want to be competitive, you've got to know what that is. Now, you might decide that you are an employer who is concerned about a living wage. And we find more and more employers are starting to at least open the door to this conversation and ask the question, not only what is the going rate, what are other people being paid for doing the similar work, but what is the living wage in our area so that people can sustain their life? That brings up a good comparison that I want to make for people, or just not really comparison, but an explanation I want to make. And that's around the difference between cost of labor and cost of living. So I have a lot of people that will use those interchangeably, and they're really not the same thing. When we're talking about cost of labor, that's where we're talking about what we have to pay people to do a job. When we're talking about cost of living, we're talking about how much money do they need to sustain the life that they want to live. So that's things like buying your eggs and paying your rent and buying gas and all that good stuff. And so what happens, and what has happened over time, is that those numbers move, and they typically move in the same direction, but not at the same rate. So that's where we have it, where people are like, well, when I was your age, I bought a house and my whole family, my kids were at school and somebody was there to meet them every day, and all of these things, because at that time the cost of labor and the cost of living were a little bit more equally matched. Whereas now we find things like housing is incredibly expensive, cars are way more expensive, and labor hasn't moved at the same rate as the cost of living. And so that is the situation that we find now, where a lot of folks, the wages just are not keeping up with inflation. So that's where then we circle it back and tie it back to that living wage. What do we need to pay people so that they can work their full time job, one full time job instead of multiple jobs, and they can provide for their basic needs? Now, certainly that's not to say everybody's going to, have a mansion or, the fanciest, newest car, but what do people need in order to just sustain their life? We could definitely go a little deeper in this conversation. I have a lot of people that I will talk to that are like, "Oh no, because if I have to pay people more, then the cost of goods is just going to keep going up." I would challenge people to think in a different way and say, "Well, let's look where the money is going. Follow the trail of money. If you have an organization, they're paying people and they pay them a little bit more. Are you going to create a culture where now people don't want to leave because they feel that they're valued? So then you don't have to deal with the turnover costs, the hiring costs, the background check, all that stuff. And then also look at where is the money going when it flows up the chain. Do you have an executive that's making hundreds, if not thousands times more than what your frontline and lower level employees are making? So I would challenge organizations that say, oh no, I could never do a living wage, to at least look, see if you could do it. See what the cost analysis is to actually bump up those wages, and see what that would then do for your employees and recruiting and retention for your organization. So definitely something to think about there. I just get tired of the excuse of, oh no, we could never afford to do that. Have you tried? Have you looked? Do the math. See if you could actually make that work. When it comes to culture, I also hear people a lot of times say we reward performance. And so they say, we've got these top performers and we want to make sure that they are getting the best dollars for that best work that they are providing. But then when I ask the follow up question, well, how are you evaluating them? Like, what does your performance review process look like? You've got to be doing it at least annually, if not more frequent than that. And they'll be like, well, we don't really do a great job with that. Or I hear from so many people that they have a performance review plan, but it's really just checking the box and it's not really doing anything. It's not truly evaluating performance. There are no metrics or KPIs that people are being held to. So from pay, if you're saying, hey, we're going to pay our top performers, then you got to know who those are. You got to be documenting, you got to have goals and hold people to them. So certainly something to think about from that pay component. One of the other things that can be really effective in shaping your culture, particularly in driving performance, is to offer some sort of variable pay. Back during the pandemic, when we had a lot of employers who were having a hard time hiring, we saw an increase in the number of employers that were using sign on and hiring bonuses. And so that was something where they were, let's throw money at this problem. But I think one of the shortfalls there is are you getting the right people? Did you get people who will then stay and become great performers for your organization? Anytime you have variable pay programs, which again can be super effective, you've really got to think about what are the behaviors that you're after? What do you want people to be doing? And is that what you're rewarding? You've got to poke holes in it. You've got to look for things that you may be incenting behaviors that you're not actually sinking. You've got to be thinking about ways that people are going to, break the system or kind of game the system and get something that they're not really, I don't want to say they're not entitled to, but they're doing the wrong things in order to earn the incentive. So poke holes in it. Think about what is it that you're trying to get from somebody. You could do spot bonuses, retention bonuses, employee referral bonuses. There's a ton of ways that you could structure a bonus or a variable pay incentive so that you're rewarding either individuals, the teams they work on, or your organization as a whole. So definitely some really good things there that you can use around culture. Right now, we are also seeing a big push around pay equity. And so we see this fall out in a couple different ways. So the first one is with pay transparency. And so with pay transparency, that's where we're showing people, whether it's posting a job ad and they've got that position starting pay, at least a range, or sharing pay ranges and salary structures with your employees. I think this is something that people are asking for. And so we see some employers getting a little bit more comfortable with it. And then, of course, we see it from a legislative standpoint too. We have a lot of different states and cities where now the organizations are required to share some amount of information. Often that's at the hiring stage, or if an applicant asks for the range, then we have to provide that. So, depending on where you are, you may have some of those laws. But what I am finding is that employers that I work with, even if those laws are not in place in their area, they're finding that it's making their lives a little bit easier if they put that information out there. So, job postings that have a hiring range listed get way more applications than those that don't have a range. So, even if the person's like, oh, I wish that was paying a little bit more, just by the fact that it has a range listed, it's going to get a lot more attraction, a lot more applicants. So post a range. And it doesn't have to be the whole big range, but you have some idea. If you're hiring a physician and you're thinking like, I'm going to pay 60K to 80K for this, that's not 200 to 250. So you have some idea of what you're really willing to pay for that job, even if there are going to be some variables that go into the actual person selected and how you determine their actual pay. So pay transparency is one thing we can do. We can also use salary history bands. And this one, again, we have some legislation in place that's requiring this, but this is where instead of saying, well, what were you making before? And that's how I'm going to base my pay. We're looking at what is this job worth? What am I willing to pay for it? And that's how I'm going to make an offer. This helps to close that pay gap because instead of saying, well, you were low, and so now I'm going to continue to screw you over because you were low before, it's saying, this is what we value for this job. And if this is the role you're performing, then this is the compensation you're going to get. So I think we're going to continue to see a greater push for pay equity, regardless of what happens from a legislative standpoint and what's required in postings and things. This is something that people are asking for. And employees are talking about it. So even if you're not sharing it, your people are definitely talking. And that's protected. They're allowed to do that. So if you've got a rule out there, and I still see them from time to time that says can't talk about your pay, that's a no-no. You can't stop people from discussing that. So I think, again, we're going to see more around pay equity and more around pay transparency. Again, whether or not it's because it's required by law or just because your people are going to be asking for it and demanding it, I think it's going to only increase. We're not going to see that one backslide at all. When it comes to benefits, there are a lot of things that you can do when it comes to shaping the culture of your organization. This in particular is an area where I think for those organizations that want to be family friendly, this is where we really put that into play. So thinking about your medical benefits, if you offer them, if you offer health insurance and you are covering a portion of that premium, are you requiring significantly greater contributions from employees if they elect family coverage? This is what I see most of the time when I'm evaluating benefit plans. And employers, they might have an option for employee only that's low cost, or maybe they even pick up the full premium for employee. But if an employer says, hey, we're family friendly, we really want to support that people have additional family members besides that one person, the employee, then we need to be charging them something that's affordable. Instead of passing on that huge premium cost that makes it nearly impossible for some people to afford, we need to make sure that if our goal is to say we support families, then we make it affordable to do that. Paid time off is another great benefit. A lot of people are saying that they really value that over anything else. And so whether you do it through sick time, vacation time, a combined bucket of paid time off, people are really looking for competitive ways that they can use that time so when they're away from work, they can really disconnect and have that time to focus on other things. We're also seeing an increase in employers that are focusing on some of the financial benefits, not only in retirement. So it might be something like a 401k or some sort of formal plan, but we're seeing a lot of information around financial education. So a lot of people are saying they're concerned about paying their monthly bills. They're concerned about being able to retire at some point. And so employers can work with different vendors. And this is one that you can do at low cost, but you can bring people in and have them do some education, help people figure out how do you do a budget? How do you set aside money, whether it's you want to pay for tuition, you want to buy a car, whatever it is, help people figure out what's their goal and how can they actually start to work towards that. So a lot of things in the benefit space really go towards driving that culture, particularly family friendly. I would say the same holds true for work-life effectiveness. During the pandemic, we had a lot of people who figured out that yes, they can effectively work from home. Then we also had the people that had to be in office because there was either capital equipment or they're customer facing, some of these things where there is no possible for work from home. What we're seeing now is a bit of a shift. So I think the win-win is in hybrid when it can work, but we see more and more companies that are requiring people to come back to the office. They can absolutely do this. And as long as employees are willing to do it and they're not jumping ship and going to another employer, then they can continue to get strict about it. But I think what's going to happen, because we already have a lack of skilled workers in so many areas, that people are going to say, all right, I'm going to go look for a job somewhere else. I'm going to go do something with a different company, or I'm even going to switch careers because I don't want to come back to the office. So I think for those organizations, from a culture standpoint, when you're saying you've got to come back to the office, you've got to be intentional. What is it that you're trying to accomplish there? Is it just because you paid rent and you want butts and seats? So that's probably not going to make your employees feel real great. What does that say about your culture? But if you're intentional and figure out what is the goal, what are the things that you're trying to accomplish by having those in office days and then communicating that to your employees, you'll be more effective at attracting and retaining those folks. People are also looking for ways that they can be successful both at work and at home. So, this is really the work life effectiveness thing. And notice I don't call it balance because we don't have balance anymore. How many of you are when you're in a meeting, you've got your phone and you're looking to see if somebody from your family or the vet's office is texting you? You've got all these different interactions that are happening during your work day that are not part of work. And it flips the other way too. You might be at home, you might be on vacation, it might be an off hour, and you've got somebody from the office who's sending you emails or who's calling you or texting you. We need to find ways that we can be successful knowing that we're always connected. So that might be looking for ways to help people be successful. Maybe that is having laundry service. So take one thing off their plate that they don't have to worry about. If you are in a period where you're busy and you are demanding more time that people are in the office, maybe you have some meals to go so that somebody doesn't have to worry about, well, what are they going to do for dinner? Not just bringing pizza in or bringing in salads or sandwiches while you're there working, but what can you do so that then the people who they're caring for, if they have them outside of the office, can also benefit. So it's really looking for ways that are going to make life easier, kind of the business of life and what you what you have to do to survive. How can you do it both at work and when you're at home? You might consider compressed work week. Do you have schedule flexibility? If somebody needs to trade shifts, how hard is it to do that? You can still manage costs, you can still manage overtime, but it's really looking for ways that you can implement that employees can do what they need to do so that they have that flexibility. This area of work life effectiveness is not going to go away. I think we're going to continue to see a push. And again, as we continue to have a shortage of skilled workers in so many different areas, I think the employees are really going to be able to continue to ask for the things that they need in order to be successful, both at work and life. It's not going to go away. Now, I already mentioned performance management in the context of compensation. So that's a piece of it for sure, but there's more to it than that. So when we think about performance management, that's also making sure that when you have those bad apples, that you hold them accountable. A lot of people like to say that buzzword, we hold people accountable, but they don't actually put their money where their mouth is. They don't do anything about it. So if you're in a culture where you say, we really value performance, well, that means when you have bad performers, you need to either manage them up or manage them out. So we can't allow people to say, I don't want to have those difficult conversations. I find it so hard to talk to people. I don't want to have to give the bad news. Well, that's too bad. That's part of the role of being a supervisor or being a manager. If you have somebody that's doing a bad job, you need to let them know exactly what it is that they're doing with specifics, no beating around the bush. And then you need to tell them what the actual expectation is. What do you want them to do? When do you want them to do it? And then you got to follow up and you got to make sure it's actually happening. You've got to make sure that people are doing the things that you're asking. And the goal when we have issues like that and we're addressing them is that people get better, we can move on and we can get back to normal. It's not that you're going to keep harping on it or holding over their head, but it's making sure that people know what the expectation is and you're holding them to that. That is going to hold people accountable. That's where we get a culture that says we care about performance. And your other people see it. I mean, you all have been there. I hear from so many people like, well, I see Jane over there and she's not doing anything and she doesn't get in trouble. So, like, I might as well do that too. I think that what we tolerate, we promote. And so, if you allow things to slide, then you're going to say, hey, this is okay. You can act this way here, or you can do that here. And that's certainly not going to help us get the kind of culture, kind of performance that we're after. So we've got to hold people accountable, manage them up, manage them out from your HR lens, in your kind of risk management lens. The managing out is when you're saying, here's what you did, here's what we need you to do. And if you're not doing it, then we're going to fire you. And we're protected because we've taken the steps to show exactly what we're firing you for. I won't get into at-will employment because certainly I know there are some elements of we can hire and fire who we want to, but at the same time, when you are getting rid of somebody and it is for cause, document. Follow that performance management, create documents that show where you have tried to work with that person, or if it's something so egregious, all the details of it so that if something happens, you've got some protection there. The last area that I want to talk about when it comes to culture is talent development. A lot of individuals are telling organizations that they are looking for opportunities to grow. They want to see a career path. They want to be able to do more. And so with talent development, it's a lot more than just saying, oh, hey, we're going to give you some tuition money. Maybe it's adding a mentor. You have to have conversations with people to figure out what it is that they want to do, and then find resources that can help support that, assuming it's in line with the organization's goals overall. I worked years ago with somebody who had kind of a side hustle, and I knew that they wanted that side hustle to become their full-time job. They were kind of getting things off the ground, and when they had the opportunity to make that their full-time job, that's what they were going to do. So when I have the talent conversation with that individual, I know, hey, this isn't the person I'm going to sink resources, and I'm not going to send them to conferences and send them to extra training, because we had that conversation that this isn't their long-term goal. Now, that doesn't mean that I said, well, I've got to get rid of this person. They don't want to be here. No, they're doing a good job. They're still satisfying the duties that are expected of them and doing it well. I just know that that's not the person that's going to be there in 5 years or 10 years running a whole department. So have those conversations with people. If there is somebody who wants to stay and grow with you, help them figure out what those paths look like. For some of the organizations that are larger, you might already have some career paths in place. You might have something where an individual knows how they need to advance and develop and what that next step is. But for some of my smaller organizations, they don't necessarily have those same levels and layers. So it's having a real conversation about how can you grow and how can that current role expand, or potentially at what point does that person kind of expire for you and they do need to go somewhere else. That's okay. We need to be okay with not all turnover is bad turnover. And you can have really great people who have left if you truly don't have an opportunity or a way to advance them. So just be real when you're thinking about talent development. What do people want? What can you actually do as an organization? So all of these different pieces are really the things that are going to go into creating your culture. So when you think about who you want to be, are you really competitive? Are you family friendly? Do you reward those top performers? Think about your total rewards. Think about what you're offering, and are they truly supporting that culture that you want to have? Organizations need to sit and have a true, honest look at who they are, what are the things that are accepted and normal, and who they want to be. And if there is a disconnect between what's actually happening and what you would like to be happening, start working on it. These things are not all things that take money, but we need to be real about who we are, who we want to be, and how we're going to get there. All right. Thanks for listening to Gorilla HR. I'm going to stop our conversation on culture today, but I hope you join me again to continue the conversation about all things HR.
That's it for this episode of the Gorilla HR podcast. We hope you found some unconventional wisdom and actionable advice to help you in your own HR journey. Remember, we're all working together to build better workplaces. Want to join in the conversation? Send us your questions, stories, and maybe even your own guerrilla tactics to podcast@gorilla-hr.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, and share with your network. Until next time.